They called it cursed. The townsfolk didn't say it loud, but they didn't have to. You could see it in the way they crossed themselves when they passed it, or how kids dared each other to get close but never got closer than a stone's throw. Sadie Hollis stood in front of that very place, a 100-year-old workshop leaning into the wind at the edge of Ashridge Hollow, its windows long blackened by soot and time. At the county auction, the building had gone up with no fanfare. $1, starting bid, the auctioneer said, but the crowd stayed silent. Not a single hand went up. Sadie hesitated only a moment before raising hers, and still, no one else moved. Not because they didn't want it, but because they were afraid of it. People looked at her like she'd just signed her own death warrant. Not with envy, not even curiosity. Just pity. They all knew what the building was. They all remembered what had happened there. It had belonged to her grandfather, Eugene Hollis, once a brilliant inventor and a man who vanished without a trace 40 years ago, shortly after sealing off the back room with bolts thick enough to stop a train. Now that door was hers to open, and whatever he'd locked behind it was finally waiting. The first time Sadie Hollis stepped inside the workshop, it felt like the air had been holding its breath for a century. It wasn't just the dust, though there was plenty of that, or the scent of old grease and rusted steel. It was the silence. Heavy, pressing, the kind that filled your ears like water. She flicked on her flashlight and swept the beam across the space. Tools still hung neatly on the pegboard, like ghosts in formation. A row of rusted oil cans lined the workbench, and in the corner, half covered with a stained canvas tarp, sat the frame of a Model T that looked like it had died mid-surgery. Her grandfather's touch was everywhere, even after 4 decades. Sadie could see the precision, the organization, the mechanical brilliance. But also, something else. Something colder. The back of the workshop was darker, the ceiling lower. Pipes hung like bones from the rafters, and the floor dipped slightly near the far wall. That's where it was the steel door. Exactly where she remembered it from childhood. Heavy, bolted, unmarked. She approached it slowly, her boots echoing softly on the concrete. She reached out and touched the cold surface. It hadn't rusted like the rest of the building, in fact. It looked like someone had cleaned it recently. Her grandfather's disappearance had always been a wound that never healed. People in Ashridge Hollow had stopped asking about him after a while. Some said he ran off with a younger woman. Others whispered about gambling debts or even experiments gone wrong. Sadie had never believed any of it. She believed in motives, not rumors, and that door that sealed, ominous door felt like the only place left to ask questions. But the bolts wouldn't budge. Not yet. She spent the next 2 weeks restoring the workshop piece by piece. By day, she sanded beams, rewired lights, and greased hinges. By night, she slept in a cot by the wood stove and stared at that door like it might whisper in its sleep. And on the 12th night it did. Not with words, but with a sound. A low metallic thud. It came from behind the door, just once. Soft, but loud enough to send a chill through her entire body. She sat up, heart pounding. Was it an animal A draft? She grabbed her flashlight and crept barefoot across the floor. The air near the door was colder than the rest of the building. Her breath fogged. She knocked once on the door with the butt of a wrench. Nothing. She knocked again. Thud! It responded. The next morning, she drove into town. The general store was quiet, just like the auction had been. Folks gave her polite smiles, but didn't ask how the restoration was going. They didn't want to know. She asked the shopkeeper, a wiry man in his 60s with a nervous twitch, if he sold cutting torches. He paused mid-scan and glanced at her over the rim of his glasses. What for? Just opening an old panel. She lied. He stared at her a beat too long. Then muttered, "Some panels are best left shut." But he sold her the torch anyway. No questions. No receipt. As she loaded the gear into the back of her truck, a woman approached her, Willa McCrae, her grandfather's old neighbor. Willa wore a long gray shawl and the look of someone who'd buried more truth than most people could carry. "You're Sadie." "Right." Sadie nodded. "I heard you bought the shop." "Yeah," Sadie said carefully. "Fixing it up." Willa's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she leaned in. "Whatever's behind that door, it's why your grandfather never came back." Sadie froze. "You knew about the door?" Willa nodded. "Everyone in this town did. We just didn't talk about it. Eugene was a good man. Too good. He found something that wasn't supposed to exist. Then one day, he sealed it up. And that was the last anyone saw of him." Sadie's mouth went dry. "Do you know what it was?" Willa just looked at her, eyes full of sorrow. "No. And I never wanted to. But you've already gone further than he ever did. So whatever you're looking for, be sure you're ready to find it." Then she walked away, slowly, as if each step might be her last. That night, Sadie didn't sleep. She stood in front of the steel door with her torch, gloves, and goggles. Her heart thundered in her chest. Her hand hovered over the igniter. "Whatever you're looking for, be sure you're ready to find it." She lit the torch, and the room lit up with blue fire. The hiss of the torch was deafening in the silence of the old workshop. Blue flames sliced across cold steel, sending sparks skittering like fireflies across the concrete floor. Sadie Hollis had rebuilt engines with cracked pistons, resurrected motorcycles from rusted frames. But this felt different. This wasn't restoration. This was trespassing. She worked slow and steady, sweat beading along her brow despite the chill. The bolts sizzled under the heat, then popped one by one, echoing like distant gunshots. When the last bolt gave way, she turned off the torch and let the silence return. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the outline of the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the latch. It turned. It wasn't locked anymore. The door creaked open. What greeted her wasn't a monster, or a body, or even a safe full of money. It was a room. Small, low-ceilinged, lit only by a faint sliver of moonlight through a narrow slit of glass at the top of the wall. But what stunned Sadie wasn't the room itself. It was what was inside it. A laboratory, not the kind you'd expect in a small-town workshop. This was something far more advanced for its time. Blueprints lined the walls, yellowed with age but still intact. Tables were covered with intricate sketches, metal prototypes, glass tubes, pressure gauges, electrical coils. Sadie stepped inside, boots echoing softly. A thick layer of dust coated everything but underneath. It was all preserved, untouched. And then she saw it. In the center of the room, sitting beneath a sheet, was something large and rectangular. A machine. She pulled the sheet off slowly. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a cross between a generator and a radio, with a central glass core surrounded by copper coils. At its base was a tarnished brass plate, engraved with a name. Project Echo, Eugene Hollis, 1957. Her breath caught. It was real. Her grandfather hadn't just tinkered with engines. He had been building something revolutionary, something secret. Sadie spent hours sorting through the papers, trying to piece together what Project Echo really was. The notes were dense, full of symbols and equations beyond her training, but she could gather one thing. Her grandfather believed he had built a device capable of recording electromagnetic echoes in the air, fragments of sound from the past. In theory, it could replay moments in time that had once existed within a space. Voices, conversations, even memories. He believed time left residue, and he had found a way to catch it. Suddenly, the thud she'd heard behind the door, the one that had called to her, made a strange kind of sense. Maybe it wasn't something in the room. Maybe it was something left behind. She stood in front of the machine and hesitantly flipped the first switch. The power coil hummed to life. Then she turned a dial marked Channel Frequency. A burst of static filled the room. She adjusted the dials slowly, unsure of what to expect. The static shifted, rising, falling until suddenly, clear as day. A voice cut through the crackle. "They'll come for me, you know, once they realize what I've built." Sadie's knees went weak. It was him. Her grandfather's voice, trapped in the air. She leaned in, heart pounding. "If someone's hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. But I need you to understand, this machine doesn't just record echoes. It remembers them. All of them." The machine sputtered, more static. Then another voice. "You were warned. Eugene..." "Shut it down." This voice was unfamiliar, deeper, more threatening. "I won't let you erase history just because it makes powerful men uncomfortable," Eugene replied. "Then history will erase you." And then gunshot. Sadie recoiled. The machine went dead. The room fell back into silence. She sat there for a long time. The truth washed over her like ice water. Her grandfather hadn't vanished. He'd been silenced, because he discovered something powerful, and someone didn't want the past to be heard. Just then, the quiet was shattered by a crash, a window breaking in the main workshop. Sadie jumped to her feet and raced out of the lab. Someone had broken in. She crept through the shadows, wrench in hand, heart hammering. The front door was wide open now. The night air felt sharp. And then she saw it. A man's silhouette, standing in the center of the workshop, staring directly at the lab door. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. Sadie stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer, but he did something worse. He smiled, and then he whispered, "You shouldn't have opened it." The workshop, once her sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Sadie gripped the wrench tighter in her hand, her breath shallow. The man stood still, just inside the doorway. His silhouette, backlit by moonlight, seemed almost etched into the shadows. But when he stepped forward, her breath caught. He wasn't what she expected. No weapon, no mask, just an older man, mid-60s, maybe older with gray in his beard, oil stains on his boots, and a strange sadness in his eyes. "You must be Sadie Hollis," he said softly. "You look like him." Her pulse spiked. "You knew my grandfather." He nodded. "I did. My name's Tom Calder. I worked with Eugene in this very shop. We built the early prototypes of Project Echo together." Sadie took a step back, keeping the wrench between them. "If that's true, where were you when he disappeared?" Tom looked away, shame washing across his face. "I was told to leave. They gave me a job out west, more money than I'd ever seen. But it wasn't a gift. It was a warning. Keep quiet, or vanish like Eugene." Sadie's grip loosened slightly. "You left him behind." "I did," Tom said, voice cracking. "And I've hated myself every day since." He sat slowly on an overturned oil drum, as if the weight of the years had finally caught up with him. You need to know what he was trying to do, Sadie. Not just the machine, not just the science. He believed people had the right to remember. To know. Sadie sat across from him, the wrench still in her lap, though her fingers had stopped trembling. I listened to the machine, she said quietly. I heard his voice, and someone else's. They threatened him. Tom nodded slowly. They were from the company that funded our early research, a front for a federal agency. They thought Echo could be used to reconstruct crime scenes, uncover war crimes, government corruption, even bring back evidence that could destroy entire careers. Sadie's eyes narrowed, and he wouldn't sell it to them. He refused. He said it belonged to the people, not to power. Tom looked up at her. So they shut him down, literally. But they couldn't find the final plans. He'd hidden them, and sealed this lab. Sadie felt a cold wave wash over her. You think that's why they killed him? Tom didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sadie stood and began pacing. Her boots thudded softly on the floor. All my life, I thought he just walked away. That he abandoned the family. My mom never talked about him. She said he was too smart for his own good, and left us with nothing. He didn't leave you with nothing. Tom said he left you the truth, and a choice. Sadie turned to him. A choice. To finish what he started, or bury it like everyone else. She felt the words settle in her bones. It was too big, too dangerous. She was just a mechanic, not a whistleblower, not a scientist. But the truth was, something inside her had shifted the moment she stepped into that lab. She walked back to the machine. It sat there quietly, humming faintly like a heart beating in sleep. You said he hid the final plans. Tom nodded. I think they're inside the machine. Not physically, digitally. Encrypted in the magnetic patterns, maybe even embedded into one of the prototype recordings. Sadie stared at the dials. Then we just play them back. Tom shook his head. No. Echo doesn't work like a normal recorder. It doesn't play what you want. It plays what the room remembers most. The strongest emotional residue. Her heart clenched. So it remembers trauma. Exactly. Sadie looked around the lab, suddenly hyper-aware of how much pain these walls had witnessed. Her grandfather's final hours, his defiance, his death. Outside, a dog barked. Then headlights swept briefly across the windows. Sadie tensed. Tom stood quickly, face pale. You told someone you opened it, didn't you? No. I've barely spoken to anyone, except for a woman named Willa. Tom swore under his breath. Willa McCrae still lives. Then others know too. They'll be watching her, if she talked to you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sadie moved toward the doorway, wrench in hand. Then we have to get those files, now, and get out! Tom grabbed her wrist. Sadie, if you run, they'll chase you. If you hide, they'll dig. But if you expose what's inside that machine, loud, public, undeniable, they can't bury it again. Her jaw clenched. Her perspective had shifted completely. This wasn't about fixing a building anymore. This was about finishing a battle that had started 40 years ago. One her grandfather had died for. And she as granddaughter might be the only one left who could win it. She turned back toward the machine, hand hovering over the dial. Then let's make it remember. The workshop was no longer silent. The machine pulsed like a second heartbeat, humming faintly with growing intensity. Sadie Hollis adjusted the frequency dial on Project Echo. Her hands steady now, no longer trembling like the first time. This time, she knew what was at stake. Tom Calder stood nearby, poring over a weathered notebook he'd pulled from behind a false wall in the lab. It was Eugene's handwriting, dense, scribbled, brilliant. Here, Tom said, tapping a page. He theorized that each space has a dominant resonance point, a memory so strong, so emotionally charged, that it becomes embedded in the walls. Sadie stared at the core of the machine, where coils spun slowly around a clear glass cylinder. And if we can tune to that memory. Tom looked at her. Then we might hear everything they tried to erase. She reached for the primary switch. The machine sputtered, then roared to life. Static flooded the air like a storm breaking through a broken dam. Sadie turned the first dial, then the second. Crackling, hissing, whispers, and then a voice. This is Eugene Hollis. Date September 14th, 1983. If you're hearing this, they haven't destroyed my work. Sadie's heart clenched. I built Echo to reveal the truth, not hide it. This machine doesn't just listen. It remembers what others want to forget. Another voice interrupted, angry, low, gruff. We gave you warnings. Eugene, you're making a mistake. No, Eugene snapped. You did. By thinking I'd be afraid of the truth. Then gunshot. The machine sputtered violently, and then silence. Sadie's eyes were wet, but she didn't look away. That moment had lived in this room for 40 years, replaying itself in the silence, trapped between the walls. And now it had been heard again. Tom stepped forward, eyes wide. That's the key. Sadie, that's the moment. It's where everything began, and where it all can end. Sadie wiped her face. So how do we get the rest out? The plans, the files. He hesitated. We amplify it. Amplify it. He nodded. Your grandfather mentioned an expansion module, something that could project the audio and resonance onto recording equipment. It's in the schematics, buried beneath the lab table. Sadie rushed over, hands flying as she pulled out drawers and unscrewed hidden panels. And there, behind a layer of dust and cloth, was a long metal box labeled Echo 2, Transmission Unit. They wired the module into the main machine. The humming grew louder. Blue light began to glow around the core. Tom flipped a switch on the transmitter. This should let us record everything Echo plays, and even broadcast it. Sadie blinked. Broadcast. Tom nodded slowly. Shortwave radio. Emergency frequencies. If we can get a clean signal, we can play this to every radio tower from here to the next state. Once it's out there, it's out. No one can bury it again. Sadie stared at the blinking lights on the panel. A machine that could broadcast truth across the airwaves. It was a weapon not of war, but of memory. Just then, the workshop lights flickered. Sadie looked up. That's not good. Tom checked the connections. No, that's someone outside. A sharp knock echoed from the front door. Then a voice. Ms. Hollis, open up. Sadie froze. She didn't recognize the voice, but its tone was official. Cold. Commanding. Tom went pale. That's them, Sadie whispered. How did they find us so fast? Tom pulled her toward the back. They've been monitoring radio frequencies since Eugene vanished. The second we powered this thing up. They knew. The knock came again. Harder. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Step away from the equipment. Sadie looked at Tom. This is the opportunity, isn't it? He nodded grimly. The only one we're ever going to get. They ran to the lab. Tom began activating the transmission sequence while Sadie braced the back door shut with a steel beam. How long do we need? She asked. 2 minutes. If we can hold them off for 2 minutes, the broadcast will complete and copy to a remote signal bank. Where? Tom smiled faintly. That's the best part. Eugene programmed it to bounce across 13 civilian frequencies, including local law enforcement. Once it hits the air, even the government can't erase it. Outside, another crash. Then the front door splintered. Boots thudded against the wooden floor. Sadie grabbed the crowbar and stood between the lab door and the hallway. I hope your encryption works. Tom, it's not the encryption I'm worried about, he said, pulling a dusty headset over his ears. It's whether the truth is loud enough. A voice barked through the hallway. This is your final warning. But Sadie didn't back down. She stared at the machine, pulsing, glowing, alive, and realized something. She wasn't just protecting her grandfather's invention. She was protecting his voice, his sacrifice, and the future of everyone who still believed the past mattered. The workshop had once been a place for bolts, grease, and gears. Now it was a battlefield. And in 60 seconds, the world would either hear the truth or never know it existed. The seconds ticked down like thunder in her chest. The machine behind her roared to life, coils spinning, lights pulsing, gears trembling like it might rip through the air itself. In the corner of the lab, Tom was frantically adjusting frequencies and loading the backup drives. The entire system was fragile, old, and never meant to be run like this. But it was working. Project Echo was finally speaking again. Sadie stood with her back to the hallway, gripping the crowbar like a sword. Her heart pounded so hard it shook her breath loose. But she didn't flinch. Not when boots hit the floorboards just outside. Not when the voice bellowed, "Stand down and surrender the device." She didn't stand down. She stood up. It wasn't bravery that held her in place. It was purpose. All her life, Sadie Hollis had been trying to fix broken things, engines, machines, relationships she couldn't save. But this wasn't about fixing anymore. This was about facing it. Facing the past. Facing the truth. Facing what had happened to Eugene Hollis, the grandfather who hadn't abandoned her, but who had died trying to give her something more valuable than gold. A voice. A legacy. A fight worth continuing. The first man who breached the door didn't expect resistance. He was tall, dressed in black tactical gear, with no badge, no insignia. He raised his weapon, but Sadie swung first. The crowbar connected with his shoulder, hard enough to knock him sideways into the doorway. He groaned and dropped his rifle. She didn't try to run. She stood over him. "You don't get to silence him again," she said through gritted teeth. More footsteps. 2 others behind him. Sadie backed up toward the lab door as Tom shouted over the rising static. "Broadcast is at 60%. She shouted back, "Can we stall them for 40 more? Tom didn't answer. He just kept working. The second intruder came in fast, expecting a fight, and this time, Sadie wasn't quick enough. He grabbed her arm, wrenching the crowbar from her grip. She fought hard, biting, kicking anything to buy time. But the man shoved her hard against the workbench, her ribs slamming into the metal. "You have no idea what you're doing," he growled. "You're endangering national security." Sadie spit blood from her mouth and glared at him. "No, you endangered it the moment you started erasing people." Behind them, the machine hit 70%, then 75%. The room buzzed like a thunderstorm building in the walls. And then a voice came through the speakers. Eugene Hollis, calm and clear, like he was in the room with them. "If you're listening to this, they failed." The agent froze. Sadie took the chance. She elbowed him in the throat. Hard. He stumbled, gasping, just long enough for her to reach the switch Tom had pointed out earlier, manual overload. "What are you doing?" Tom shouted. Forcing it through faster, she yelled, "We don't have 40 seconds!" She slammed the lever down. The machine screamed. Blue light burst from the core like lightning, filling the lab with a glow that painted the walls in ghostly fire. The voices came faster now, layers of memories overlapping. Thousands of truths replayed all at once. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was everything they had been trying to suppress. Sadie dropped to her knees, overwhelmed by the noise and the weight of it all. But in that chaos, something inside her solidified. She wasn't just Eugene's granddaughter anymore. She wasn't just a mechanic, a woman trying to reclaim something lost. She had become the final witness, the voice for every person who'd been silenced, every inventor erased, every truth buried beneath cement and concrete and fear. And she knew this was what Eugene had died for. Not for blueprints, not for invention, but for the moment when someone brave enough would stand here and refuse to let it die again. The broadcast hit 100%. A long tone echoed through the room. Then silence. The transmission had been sent far, wide, irrevocably. The truth was free. The agents stood in silence. Some lowered their weapons. One even looked away. Ashamed. Tom rose slowly, blinking away tears. "You did it," he whispered. "God. Sadie. You did it." Sadie leaned against the wall, her ribs aching, hands bruised, but a strange peace settled in her chest. "Eugene did it," she said softly. "I just turned the mic back on." Outside, sirens in the distance. Police. Reporters. Maybe even feds. The signal had reached them all. The secrets were out. And Sadie Hollis, mechanic, granddaughter, warrior of memory, had changed everything. Not with a gun, not with revenge, but with truth and the courage to let it be heard. By the time the sun rose over Ashridge Hollow, everything had changed. The workshop still stood cracked, soot-stained, weathered by decades of secrets, but now the windows glowed with soft morning light. No longer just a relic, now a witness. Outside, emergency vehicles lined the gravel road. Reporters had started to arrive, their vans kicking up dust in the orange dawn. Satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like antennas for the truth. Inside, Sadie Hollis sat on the concrete floor, legs stretched out, arms wrapped around her knees. Her ribs still throbbed. Her face was smudged with soot and dried blood. But her eyes, they were clear, sharp, certain. Across from her, Tom Calder handed her a cup of black coffee, still shaking, but smiling. "They're calling it the Hollis broadcast," he said. "It's already gone viral. The clip of your grandfather's voice, his last message, has been shared over 1,000,000 times." Sadie blinked slowly. 1,000,000 people, 1,000,000 hearts now carried the words Eugene Hollis had died trying to say. Authorities were already investigating, not just the disappearance of Eugene Hollis, but the decades-long effort to erase Project Echo from existence. Names were being named, files being opened. The men who had tried to stop her were now on the run, or under federal interrogation. Sadie never got their names. She didn't care to. She had seen their eyes when the transmission ended. They hadn't expected the truth to survive. But it had. And it was louder than any gunshot. Later that morning, she stood just outside the workshop as the town began to gather. People she hadn't seen since the auction. Men who had kept their mouths shut for decades. Women who'd lost brothers, husbands, sons to stories that never added up. And at the edge of the crowd, Willa McCrae, her eyes glassy, her shawl clutched tightly, but her face filled with something Sadie hadn't seen before. Pride. "You did it," Willa whispered when they met. "You finished what Eugene started." Sadie shook her head. "No. I just stopped being afraid." The mayor asked if she wanted a public commendation. A journalist asked if she'd sell the rights to her story. A government agent asked if she had backups of the recordings a bit too eagerly. She refused them all. Instead, she walked to the middle of the street and faced the people of Ashridge Hollow. No microphones, no cameras, just her voice. "My grandfather was murdered for trying to let this town remember, and for years, we've all let that memory stay buried. Not just his, but others too." She paused, looked around. "We deserve better than silence, and we owe the truth to everyone who was made to forget." That day, she reopened the workshop doors for good. Not as a mechanic's garage, but as a memorial to Eugene, to every name whispered in static, to those who had been lost in the noise. Project Echo was placed under glass, fully restored. Its final playback, Eugene's farewell, now looped quietly in the background for anyone who stepped inside. And right beside it, a plaque with just 5 words. Memory is stronger than fear. Sadie didn't become famous. She didn't run for office. She didn't write a book. She stayed. She turned the land behind the shop into a place for young engineers to learn, to build, to dream freely without fear of suppression. She mentored kids who had questions, and no one brave enough to answer them. And every now and then, she'd take out her tools, kneel beside an old motor, and remind herself that creation and courage were made from the same steel. Sometimes at night, when the wind howled across the hills, she'd hear it again, the faint hum of the machine still alive, deep within the walls, but not haunting, no longer asking to be heard, just remembering, just echoing. In the end, Sadie Hollis didn't change the world by herself. She didn't invent a time machine or uncover a conspiracy on national television. She simply did what her grandfather never had the chance to do, finish the transmission. And in doing so, she proved that even in the quietest corners of forgotten towns, with nothing but rusted tools and inherited pain, a single voice can still shake the walls. A single act of courage can break the seal of silence. And the truth once spoken never dies. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen to what others are trying to forget. Sadie Hollis didn't set out to be a hero. She was just trying to fix up an old workshop, a piece of her family's history. But along the way, she discovered something far more important than blueprints or machines, the weight of silence, and the cost of hiding the truth. In a world that often tells us to move on, to let things go, to bury pain for the sake of peace, Sadie chose to remember. She chose to listen to the voices in the walls, to fight for what had been silenced, and to protect the legacy of someone who refused to lie for the sake of power. The lesson: truth isn't always loud, but when you find it, when you speak it, it echoes longer than fear ever will. The end? Up next, 2 more stories that will challenge what you think you know. Click to keep listening. And if you believe the past deserves a voice hit, subscribe and become part of the echo.